Hey friends, if this is your first time on my channel, you are most definitely welcome. Please be sure to hit that subscribe button. It only takes 2 seconds and you guys will know every time I post a video. If you are a returning watcher, thank you so much for sticking with your girl, and you know I'm back with that fire. So today, I had never actually planned to make this video, but because I'd gotten a question on my most recent YouTube video and I thought this would be a great video to do, just to kind of give you guys a visualization of what the gap year timeline does look like, because it is kind of confusing. So I wanted to make a video about it. So as you guys can see here, I've drawn this nice little diagram of 3 years, and this is by calendar year. And essentially today I'm just going to be walking you through what taking 1 gap year looks like versus what taking 2 gap year looks like. So as you guys can see, I have calendar year 1, calendar year 2, and calendar year 3. And I'm going to go in and label, but I just kind of want to show you guys what this visualization looks like. I'm going to first talk about what does it look like if you're taking 1 gap year, and basically talking about what that looks like. If you're going to be taking 1 gap year, essentially what that means is that you will be applying to medical school as you graduate college. So let's say your average school starts school around August, September. We'll do September just so you know we have clear-cut months. You've had your summer off. This was your junior year. Had your little fun summer. And right here is where you would graduate. That's where you would graduate. And before I kind of walk you through what you should be doing your senior year, first I want to give you a visualization of when you will be applying. You graduate in May, but guess what? You're also applying to medical school as well. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is something you really want to think about is graduating is a fun, exciting time, but it's also a stressful time because while you're wrapping up your classes, your finals, you're going to deal with family who's coming in. You have to move out of school, move to wherever it is you're going. In that same month, you have to submit your application to medical school. You don't have to submit in May, but I highly, highly advise that you submit in May. I mean, technically speaking, you could submit in June, July, or even August, but I feel like submitting around July, August is really on the later side, and I wouldn't recommend it. So if you are trying to use strategies that will help you be successful, you really want to apply in May, pushing it June. So at the same time, you'll be doing this. So that's one thing to think about, which can pose as a very stressful time. So now let's go back into senior year. So before we get to applying to medical school, what needs to happen? So let's talk about some things that you need to know before applying. So the first thing you need to know is that you must have an MCAT score. If you don't have an MCAT score, you have no business applying. And I will not use myself as an example because I applied to medical school literally the same month I took my MCAT, so I applied without knowing my MCAT score, which I would never, ever, ever recommend. But you need an MCAT score. You should be done with, I would say, 75 to 80% of your pre-med classes, which is totally fine. It's important to know that applying, the application cycle takes a full year. So you start in May, and guess what? The application cycle essentially technically kind of ends in the May of the next year. As I mentioned in the previous video, it can take anywhere from 1 day to 6 weeks for your app to be verified, which is why I say you want to apply in May. So let's go back to our timeline. So what needs to happen before we get to this stage? So that means during your senior year, I would recommend around your summertime you study for and take the MCAT. Doing this gives you time, of course, to study, but then you'll get your score back. Assuming you take your MCAT in August, you'll get your score back around the end of September, and that gives you like all of fall quarter to really decide if you need to retake the MCAT. So you have that luxury to retake MCAT if you need to. Organization is key. So really around December, January, what you want to start doing is, and this is in addition to being in school, remember you are still taking a full course load as well. What you also want to do is start collecting recommendations, because professors are really, really slow, so you really want to get on ahead of that early, and you can always collect recommendations early. Just have your recommenders submit their recommendation to Interfolio. Interfolio will be able to submit your recommendations to your MCAS application for you. You want to start drafting your personal personal statement, because I promise you, your first draft of your personal statement will not be your last draft. So you definitely want to start early so you have a couple months to edit and get feedback. You also want to start organizing your extracurricular activities too. You want to start writing down, okay, what have I done in the last 4 years I've been in college? What have I spent my summers doing? You really want to start collecting that information so that by the time you get to May, it's a lot easier to just input information because you've been collecting over time. In addition to organizing your extracurricular activities, you also want to start writing up what descriptions of your extracurricular activities, because they will ask you to write a description of your extracurricular activity. And if you guys want to see a video on how I wrote descriptions for my extracurricular activities, please give this video a thumbs up and comment below and let me know, and I will put that in my queue of videos to make. So you really want to spend your senior year doing this, and this isn't, like I said, in addition to taking classes as well, which that's up to you what your senior year course load will look like. Some people may have a pretty light course load senior year because they've worked really hard their first 3 years, so they have that extra time to do that. Some people may not. Like for me, for example, senior year was pretty science heavy for me because I needed to take a lot of science classes to raise my GPA, and I really needed to spend senior year focusing on school. So I really did not have the bandwidth to be preparing any of my applications or studying for the MCAT during that time. So essentially by April, you definitely want to have a solid understanding of where you are. You want to know that you have recommendations, you have a hopefully close to final draft of your personal statement, you have your extracurricular activities in place, you kind of putting in your application materials and getting in all the information you need, because when May 1st comes around, that's when you can start inputting information into your AMCAS application. So after this, you graduate, woohoo, yay! You submit your application. Remember, I said the application cycle takes a full year. So from May all the way to the next May is the application cycle. So really, when you would be starting medical school, if you take a gap year, would be here. Let me put this in, a happy color. Start medical school. And one thing I forgot to do is say this would be gap year 1. As I said, you would start medical school here. So really, your gap year that you're taking, that one gap year, is essentially just your application year. And as I mentioned in a previous video, starting July, secondaries, well, technically June, but July, we'll say secondaries get released. So you'll spend really a lot of July and August writing your secondary applications and sending them back to the schools. Then interview season for medical school starts in August and goes all the way to essentially March. So basically what this means is anytime from August to March, you can be traveling for interviews for medical school. And it's important to note, and I'm going to put this in a different color, that by October 15th, schools are allowed to officially start accepting students. So assuming that you start interviewing in August, September, October, you can probably find out by October 15th whether you got into medical school. And if you find out that you got into medical school that you are happy with and you'd be happy at, essentially your application process may stop in October. If you find that, you haven't heard back from schools in October, or you're still waiting to hear back from some other schools, your application process might go a bit longer. You might be interviewing in November, December, January, February, March, but who really wants to be interviewing in March? I feel like that's so far away. You take whatever interviews you get. So essentially, you can be interviewing for this entire time, and anywhere from October 15th up until really July, medical schools can accept people or take people off the wait list. So that's basically what you're doing in terms of application process in your first gap year. But during that gap year, of course, you're not just applying to medical school and being idle. You should be doing something else in that time, because on your secondaries and in interviews, schools will ask you, now that you've graduated, what are you spending your time doing? So really, starting from the time you graduate, maybe you might want to take the summer. Yeah, you may want to take the summer maybe to travel, have some fun. But really, you want to spend your gap year doing something productive. And that is the key here. So that can be either you have a job, maybe you're doing research, maybe you're volunteering while living at home because volunteering doesn't pay the bills. You may be doing a post-bac year. right? Maybe you just have a couple classes to take and you're using that year to take those last minute classes you need to take, because technically speaking, you don't have to finish all your medical school classes to apply to medical school. You don't have to be done with it. The rule really is that by the time you start medical school, you want to be done with all those classes. So really, you can apply to medical school and maybe you haven't finished physics, or maybe, you still have to take calculus, or maybe, there's biochemistry still lingering around, right, that you want to take. But you definitely want to beware, because some secondaries will ask you for the classes that you have taken, and they definitely want to see some pre-med grades as you maybe finish taking whatever class you have to take. So for example, I didn't take physics at Stanford, so I used my first gap year to take physics, but I had taken everything else. So even though I still had a grade pending for physics by the time I applied, I didn't have all my full grades yet. They also had other grades to work with. So it's important to recognize that you can take classes during your gap year, but at the end of the day, you must be done with the classes by the time you start medical school, and you must have a satisfactory grade. Because if you get accepted in October and you're taking physics and you're like, you know what, yes, we got accepted, we don't have to worry about physics, and then you end up with like a C or a D, the schools may, kind of look at you somehow, and really your acceptances is conditional. It may be conditional upon you continuing to do well in whatever classes you're taking. It's conditional upon that you don't, become a felon or get arrested or anything like that. So you really still want to make sure that even though you're interviewing, even if you get in, you are still excelling in whatever it is you're doing during your gap year. So that's essentially what a gap year looks like if you're just doing one. Please be sure to comment below and let me know if anything was unclear. If you have any more questions, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you watch this full video and you are still not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe now, and comment below and let me know the kind of videos you want to see. Thank you.